June 22, 1944. What would you do if, in the middle of a battlefield where smoke crawled like living shadows, you heard a wounded man whisper your name from a place no living soldier could still be breathing? On the opening day of Operation Bagration, the Red Army's colossal 1944 offensive that obliterated the German Army Group Center, the frontline medics were thrust into a nightmare that mixed duty, terror, and something far darker than enemy fire. As the Red Army pushed across the marshlands and dense forests of Belarus, the scale of destruction was unlike anything the Eastern Front had seen since Stalingrad. Artillery barrages lasting hours turned the sky into a shaking red dome, and entire German regiments were erased before they even understood the size of the Soviet assault. In this chaos, a young Soviet medic, Mikhail Sokolov, crawled on his stomach through the mud near Mogilev, navigating burning tree lines, where the June heat made the blood on the ground steam like a boiling river. The explosions had ruptured his hearing, so the world sounded underwater. Muffled booms, broken shouts, the eerie rattle of Panzer wrecks still burning minutes after the lines were breached. All around him, soldiers screamed for tourniquets, morphine, water. Yet the German counter-barrage had been so violent that bodies were scattered in ways that didn't look human anymore, and the medic had to touch each one just to know whether he was dealing with the living or the dead. He remembered the moment he slid into a crater and saw Corporal Denisov reaching upward, fingers curled as if trying to grab Mikhail's sleeve. Denisov was someone he had stabilized earlier that morning, and Mikhail rushed to pull him out, only to discover that Denisov had died several minutes before, his pupils already fixed and empty. The movement was just the heat of the blast causing post-mortem muscle contractions, but to Mikhail, alone in the smoke, it felt like the dead refusing to stay still. Hours later, while dressing a stomach wound on another soldier, he heard footsteps circling him, slow, dragging, too soft to be German infantry retreating from the collapsing front. He whispered into the fog, asking who was there, but no voice answered, only the sound of something brushing against a fallen helmet and then vanishing as if swallowed by the smoke itself. Moments like that were common on the Eastern Front, where exhaustion and terror blurred the line between reality and imagination. But on this day, with the forest on fire and the ground shaking under Soviet Katyusha rocket salvos, even hardened veterans admitted the battlefield felt haunted. Yet despite the horror, the Red Army pressed forward with unstoppable force, river crossings under machine gun fire, armored columns rolling through swamp mud waist-deep, infantry storming trench networks built to be impregnable, but collapsing under the weight of Soviet shock tactics. By June 24, the German Fourth Army was fractured. By June 28, key fortified cities like Orsha and Mogilev were swallowed in the Soviet advance, and by early July, entire German divisions were trapped in the Minsk pocket, suffering one of the worst encirclements in military history. As Mikhail moved with the 49th Army deeper into Belarus, he encountered scenes that would scar him long after the war. Abandoned German aid stations, where blood-soaked bandages were piled so high they looked like snowdrifts. Farmhouses filled with civilians who had survived months of occupation, but shook uncontrollably at the sight of any soldier in uniform. Forests where fallen men lay so thickly that medics stopped keeping count and simply worked until their hands refused to move. One night, while clearing a ruined trench line near Borisov, Mikhail swore he saw a figure standing perfectly still between two burned-out trucks, tall, featureless, unmoving. When he blinked, it was gone, but the hair on his arm stood up for the rest of the march, and the surviving soldiers later admitted that the battlefield didn't only feel dangerous, it felt unwelcoming, as if something older than the war watched them from the tree line. Despite everything, the relentless Soviet push crushed the German command structure. Communications failed, supply lines collapsed, and entire battalions were lost to the forests, unable to escape the tightening Soviet encirclements. By the time Minsk fell on July 3, 1944, over 300,000 German soldiers were dead, captured, or missing, So many that survivors later said it felt like their entire army had vanished into the earth. When the operation finally slowed, Mikkel realized he had treated hundreds of wounded men in just a few days, often with shaking hands, sometimes in total darkness, sometimes unsure if the whispers he heard around him were real or just his mind cracking under pressure. He survived the operation, but he never forgot the question that haunted him from that first day. The moment he heard someone whisper his name from the smoke, long after he knew that voice belonged to a man who could no longer speak. If you were the medic crawling alone through fire and ruins on June 22, 1944, would you still have the courage to answer the next whisper calling your name?